Everybody, Mr. Musak back with some more history. Joining me today is my little dog Bowie, who's with me tonight as well. Kind of shoot history at you guys, and we're going to continue now to talk about the industrial age and maybe a few problems that happened during this industrial age, a few issues they have, as well as maybe a few solutions to these problems that take place. And we're going to start off looking at where people live, and we're going to start off with the cities themselves. A lot of times cities had these areas of slums, basically very poor areas of the cities where a lot of tenements were built. Tenements were big, huge apartment complexes where you might have 100, 200 apartments in them, and each apartment may hold two or three families. They were low rent, but yet very, very dangerous situation. You have so many people crammed together in one spot. Usually, this is where a lot of immigrants end up. A lot of ethnic groups are found in different tenements that exist in a lot of the bigger cities, like say Chicago, New York, so on and so forth. And so in these tenements, you find a lot of issues taking place. Within the tenements, you can have a lot of problems as these buildings are built, big buildings built so close together. One example, natural disaster is a big problem. In 1906, city of San Francisco had a huge earthquake that hit the city. And as you can see from the picture there, a good chunk of the city was destroyed. Hundreds of people lost their lives in this huge earthquake that took place. It was not just the earthquake that caused so much damage, but also fires after the earthquake hit. Um, After the earthquake hit, a lot of times gas lines, those kind of things got ruptured, and we end up having these big, huge fires across it that destroy much of the city. And fire being even a bigger problem. Picture shows the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The old story goes that there was a cow that kicked over a lantern, caused a big fire. Probably wasn't that, but a lantern could have been involved. And so we have a large fire that basically goes from building to building in Chicago because the buildings are built so close, not built from necessarily the best materials, and so this huge fire destroys a good chunk of the city. Um, Funny thing is that it's actually on the same exact day as the Great Peshtigo Fire, which happens in northern Wisconsin, where the Great Peshtigo Fire actually burns a much larger area and costs more lives than a Chicago fire does. The other big issue we have in these cities is disease. Because all these people are so close together, you have a lot of problems, including lack of sanitation. Modern day sewer systems don't exist yet. You have issues of waste being thrown to the streets, garbage being placed on the streets, those kind of things. You have diseases that are spread from person to person. Cholera is still a pretty big problem. Cholera is a bacteria that comes from drinking contaminated drinking water. So people getting cholera makes you very, very ill. Things like typhus, things like tuberculosis is spread very, very easily amongst the cities because the buildings are just so close together. And so that's one of the big problems in these cities at the time is the idea of disease. Another problem, because people are so close together, is crime. There's a lot of crime because there's people crammed in very, very close together. There's not a lot of space, not a lot of money, not a lot of jobs, and some people turn to crime. Everything from robbery to extortion, bribery, those kind of things, all the way through to things like prostitution and that kind of stuff happening. And even ideas of gangs still exist in these cities. Now, it's not the kind of gangs we think of today that involve rap music and that kind of stuff. Instead, it's more gangs like the idea of ethnic gangs that develop. It's like you organize an ethnic group, might be an Italian gang, an Irish gang, so on and so forth in different parts of the city, and they want to control certain industries, uh, whether it be prostitution, gambling, extortion, those kind of things that they do within the cities. Now, another group, kind of a gang that exists is also the political machines. Political machines were a gang that completely controlled the local government. Essentially, this is a group of people that kind of ran the government. They would choose people, pay the money for them to put up to election, and make sure they got in office. Now, when they got these guys in office, they then trade the favors that they got for office for votes, election fraud, bribery, those kind of things. In fact, they actually help immigrants to get their votes. A lot of times they would take immigrants who are living, in poverty, working at factories, those kind of things, get them half a day off of work, give them food, alcohol, those kind of things, and then take them to vote on election day, and then tell them who to vote their person in. Now, obviously, you have a person as mayor, city council, Congress, whatever. Instead of that person who's elected in working for the people of the city, they're working for that political machine instead. One of the biggest political machines was Tammany Hall in New York City. Tammany Hall had a lot of power in New York City from the 1880s all the way up through the 1940s. They had a lot of power and control throughout New York City. And a person in charge was a guy who went by the name of Boss Tweed. His picture's here, his cartoon is over here. But Boss Tweed was one of these guys running these political machines who basically controlled a lot of New York politics for a very long time. And he was kind of the person that was running the show of all New York, even though it looked like people were getting elected and put in office. Now, because we have so much money flying around here, we have the issue of haves and have-nots to develop. Certain people become super, super rich during this time. Your guys like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, so on and so forth. And a lot of people, actually, big businessmen, become very, very rich. And a lot of people thought he would kind of trickle down to the rest of the people. They thought, hey, if some people are rich, eventually they'll fall down and fall to everybody else. Well, it didn't really happen. There were a lot of people that were so poor during this time, especially the working class. Immigrants, especially who worked in factories, were very, very poor. You have minorities, African Americans, Chinese, those groups, Native Americans as well, that were very, very poor during this time and living just above, survival level. We're talking. Also down south, where it wasn't so much industry, but agriculture was king. There were a lot of poor in the south as well. Now, this time period, it's another name called the Gilded Age. Now, gilded means covered with gold. And Mark Twain, the famous author who wrote Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer, came up with this term. He basically said that, all the rich people showed off their wealth. They belonged to private country clubs. They had 6, 7 houses. They had mansions. They had the newest technology, those kind of things. And they were kind of almost like cover themselves in these fancy, fancy things to show off all they had. While most of the poor struggled to eat. And so it's kind of the idea of the Gilded Age between the rich and the poor. Especially down the South, where a lot of small sharecroppers and tenant farmers were very, very poor, as the South did not have the same industrial development as the North did. And so we see a big difference in the country with that. Now, there were a few people that tried to change this. And this time they were called Muckrakers. And basically, Muckrakers want to try and make things fair for people. We'll talk more about this next unit. We talk about the progressive unit, but I want to touch on a few things that people try to do. A lot of times the Muckrakers did this through the press, the newspapers. They did a lot of research. They wrote articles trying to expose all the unfair things that people were doing to each other. Everything from housing to politics, child labor, prostitution, so on and so forth, trying to find a way to get all these issues fixed in the world. One guy with Upton Sinclair, he wrote a book in 1906 called The Jungle. It was still immigrants who were in Chicago in the meatpacking industry, where all those big factories were taking the cows in and processing meat. And it tried to show both the life of immigrants and just how poor the meatpacking factory was. It showed how poor the salaries were, working for 10 cents a day, those kind of things. It showed treatment immigrants, how immigrants going to get certain kinds of jobs, how immigrant families had to live together to make ends meet. Even it brought in the idea of voting. Sinclair saw how all the voting, there was a bunch of Polish immigrants and Eastern European immigrants were picked up one day by the local political machine taking a vote. Now, the other thing he did was show what kind of things went into food and just how little care was taken to the industry. He showed it really went into processed meat, things like rats, severed fingers, droppings, bones, animals that were sick and should be used to eat, that kind of stuff, were all shown in his book. And eventually, at the Food and Drug Administration of it, will bring back The Jungle next unit probably. But I just want to touch on that, as it kind of shows both the idea of immigrants, how they're being treated, and the idea of the factories that were there. Ida Tarbell was a lady who researched Standard Oil Company. She had a relative who was put out of business by Rockefeller and his horizontal integration. So she published articles about the Standard Oil Trust and just how dirty their business practices were. And eventually, her articles led to the breakup of Standard Oil and kind of the first trust that gets busted in this time period. Another man was Lincoln Steffens from St. Louis, Missouri, and he wrote about the cities. He wrote about the tenements. He wrote about the actual stories of immigrants and published them for the whole country to read, try and get people to help them out and try and get things fixed. Two other women that I want to just sort of touch on real quick were Jane Addams and Mother Jones. Jane Addams was, she had a lot of work working with housing immigrants and the inner city, and she created something called the Hull House in the immigrant area of Chicago, where there were all different kinds of immigrants from all over the place. It was based in an old mansion inhabited by women, where they did some social research about all different things happening in the cities and immigration, how people were working, and did things to help educate people, including like night school and that kind of stuff, to help immigrants, teach them English, all those kind of things. Mother Jones, seen down here, was another woman who did a lot of work with child labor. Child labor is very, very common in the United States. Kids who work in factories, kids working in mines, those kind of things that they couldn't go to school, had to work, had to support their families. And so she organized protests to kind of try and stop child labor, including, especially one time, having kids march from West Virginia to the coal mines to Washington, D.C. to petition the president, which we'll talk about a little more too in the progressive era. The other big issue during this time is the idea of racial discrimination. Segregation from Reconstruction continues. We developed laws called Jim Crow laws. These laws were these segregation laws that basically forced segregation on the country. It was called de facto segregation, de jure segregation, where white and black were forced legally to be separate. And so we also had other voting restrictions come into place that are still happening from the Reconstruction era. Things like the grandfather clause still exist, literacy tests still exist, poll taxes still exist. All those kind of things still exist during this time, but now they're legal. They're actual laws stating this in certain states. Now, one group tried to fix this, and a guy named Homer Plessy, who was 1/8 African American, down in Louisiana, wanted to try and bring attention to these Jim Crow laws. So he sat in a rail car for white people only. He was arrested, put on trial, and found guilty. Now, they brought this case up to the Supreme Court in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson. So Plessy being Plessy, Ferguson being the Attorney General of Louisiana. In the end, the ruling was upheld by the Supreme Court, and we'll look at this ruling closer in class. But basically, this court case, said that separation is okay as long as the facilities are equal. The question is, are they always equal? Well, that means that schools could be separate, theaters could be separate, drinking fountains, bathrooms could all be separate, but only as long as they were equal places and had to prove they were equal, even though typically they weren't equal. In terms of education, a lot of times schools were separate. A lot of times African Americans didn't get to go to school, especially in the more rural areas, especially not going to college. And so Booker T. Washington was an educated African American man who decided to make his own college just for African Americans. It was called the Tuskegee Institute. And it was designed to help African Americans get teaching degrees, technical degrees, and more access to jobs. And the idea that if you get an education, you have a chance to succeed and a chance to go forward. And so it's kind of one of the ways that he tried to make change happen for African Americans in the late 1890s. We'll look more at Booker T later on. Another man, W.E.B. Du Bois, seeing the picture down here, was trying to do a different approach to it. Okay, he had one of the first ever African Americans to get a PhD from Harvard. He was a sociologist, and really wanted African Americans to get higher education degrees, become well-educated leaders. He became part of a group called the NAACP, which stood for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples. And they basically wanted to use the courts as a way to try and fix segregation. They also talk about doing anti-lynching laws, which we'll do in a second. But they try to use the courts basically and the court system to fix the problems that were happening. Now, I mentioned lynching. Lynching was a big problem in the late 1800s or 1900s. And lynching was a punishment usually by death for an alleged crime. And so basically, if an African American down south was accused of a crime, instead of getting an actual arrest and trial, people in town would just basically kidnap them and then hang them for the alleged crime without any kind of proof coming to that crime whatsoever. And typically, these crimes were not true. These crimes never happened. It was just an accused crime. Typically, it was rape. If something happened with even an African American male talking to a white woman, accusations could start flying, and all of a sudden, this guy who was talking to somebody gets picked up and lynched. It was happening in a lot of southern states. There's a huge problem with hundreds of people being lynched every single year. Sometimes, multiple people a month we're talking being lynched down south. One people tried to stop this was a woman named Ida B. Wells. She's an African American woman who tried to push for anti-lynching laws in different states and federal anti-lynching laws. She went down south. She researched all lynching that had taken place and tried to figure out just why the lynching was going on and call attention to the lynching that was going down. All right, guys. So what does this whole kind of thing tell us here? First off, all the big advances we had during this time, we had big problems, and we start fixing the problems. We'll get to more of those fixes next unit in the progressive era. Thanks a lot, guys. You guys have a good night. We'll see you guys later.